My 5-year-old daughter was rushed to the hospital after she stopped breathing. The doctors called my wife, but my mother-in-law took the phone and said, "Don't ruin the vacation. He's just trying to make you come home." Even after the doctor said, "Your daughter may not survive the night," they stayed away. When they returned 5 days later, they found something they never expected. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Abel Rourke spent his working life putting power back into deadlines, and he could tell you something most people never think about. Electricity does not fail all at once. A grid dies in stages. First a flicker nobody reports, then a brownout everyone ignores. Then one bad night, one storm too many, and whole neighborhoods go black, and everybody asks how it happened so suddenly. It never happened suddenly. It happened for months in small failures while nobody was looking. His marriage died the same way, and he was the last man in the county who should have missed the signs because reading failing systems was his entire job. But that is the cruel trick of it. A lineman never works on his own house. He was a power lineman on the North Carolina coast, out of Wilmington, where the Atlantic sends hurricanes up the shore like bills coming due. When the storms knocked the grid down, Abel was one of the men who went up in the bucket trucks while everyone else was still boarding windows. He had worked 100-hour weeks in the black and the wet so that other families could have light and cold milk and a working furnace. 17 years of it. His hands were a map of old burned scars and rope calluses, and he knew the sound of a dying transformer the way a farmer knows the sound of rain coming. His father had been a lineman too, and had died at 51, not on a pole, but in a recliner, quietly, of a heart that had simply worked itself out. Abel was 22 when it happened, and he had learned 2 things standing at that graveside. The first was that a man's time is the only thing he cannot restrain. The second was that when his own family came someday, he would be present for it in a way his exhausted, beloved, absent father had never quite managed. He kept half that promise, the half he could control. His daughter was named Callie. She was 5 years old that March, small for her age and absolutely unafraid of anything that crawled, hopped, or scuttled. She named the lizards in the backyard like they were on her payroll. There was a fat one on the fence post she called Mr. Green, and a quick little one by the hose reel named Flash, and she gave them performance reviews over breakfast. She had her mother's dark hair, and people said her father's stubborn calm, though Abel privately thought she was braver than both of them put together. She also had asthma. Diagnosed it too. After a winter cold turned into a night neither Abel nor the emergency room ever forgot. Since then, the family had run it like a safety program, because safety programs were the one language Abel spoke fluently. Rescue inhalers on every floor of the house. A nebulizer in the hall closet, checked monthly. The asthma action plan taped inside the kitchen cabinet door, laminated, with the pediatrician's number and the emergency thresholds in bold. Abel could recite that plan at 3 in the morning with a flashlight in his teeth, and twice he hadn't needed to. His wife's name was Brielle. And here's the honest thing, the thing it took Abel years in a courtroom to be able to say out loud. He lost his wife long before any of this happened. He lost her slowly, in stages like a grid going down. And the person who took her was her own mother, Sondra. Sondra was 63 years old, tanned the color of furniture, and she had never once, in 8 years, called Abel by his first name without a small pause in front of it, as if the name itself were an unfortunate purchase her daughter had made without consulting her. A lineman was not what Sondra had raised her daughter to marry. She had said so at the rehearsal dinner, smiling into a microphone disguised as a joke. Everyone had laughed except Abel's mother, who had gone very still and who never forgot it. But Sondra's genius, and Abel came to understand it was genuine genius, was not open cruelty. Open cruelty makes enemies. Sondra worked lower at the foundations. She kept Brielle exactly insecure enough to need her mother's approval for everything, and exactly comfortable enough never to question where the comfort came from. She had opinions about Brielle's clothes, her hair, her parenting, her marriage, delivered always with a sigh and the words, "I only say this because no one else loves you enough to be honest." Every argument in Abel's marriage had 3 people in it. He was always outnumbered, and the vote was never close. And the money. God, the money. It moved the way water moves, always downhill towards Sondra, always through Brielle, so that no single drop of it ever looked like theft. A girl's trip here on the family card because memories matter, Abel. A loan for Sondra's condo association fee, never repaid, never mentioned again. Boutique charges, spa weekends, Sondra's car repairs. Over 6 years, though Abel would not total it up until a lawyer made him, $61,000 of storm pay and overtime and holiday double time flowed quietly out of the Rourke household and into the maintenance of Sondra's lifestyle. Abel worked the hours. Sondra spent them. He told himself what men tell themselves, that it was cheaper than the fighting, that family was family, that Brielle was a good mother underneath, and the underneath would surface once Callie got older, once Sondra got older, once things settled. He was a patient man. Patience was a job requirement. You do not hurry around live current. But some lines are not sleeping. Some lines are dead. And the difference, as he taught every apprentice, is the difference between waiting and wasting your life. That March, Sondra announced, which was the correct verb, that she and Brielle were going to Punta Cana. 9 days. A resort with 3 pools and a swim-up bar, booked business class, because Sondra had read that flying coach after 60 was bad for the circulation. Booked, of course, on Abel's card. Brielle presented it to him not as a question, but as a done thing, standing in the kitchen with her mother's phrasing in her mouth. "Mama and I need this, Abel. Family memories matter." He looked at the number and did the math against his February storm pay, and he said what he always said, which was fine. Callie had preschool and swim class and a life with rhythms in it, and truthfully, and he felt guilty for the truth of it, the house was calmer when they were gone. He and Callie had their own country when it was just the 2 of them. Pancakes with too many blueberries. Lizard patrol at dusk. A bedtime routine that ran like a well-dressed line. No slack, no snags. They flew out on a Friday. Callie and Abel waved from the porch, and Callie asked if Mr. Green could sleep inside while Mama was gone, and Abel said absolutely not, and Mr. Green slept inside twice. On day 4 of the trip, Callie caught a cold. The pediatrician's office listened to her chest over a video call and said what they always said. "Watch her. Keep up the controller inhaler. Come in if the action plan says come in." On day 5, at 9:40 at night, his daughter stopped breathing. He would spare anyone hearing this story most of that hour because 5 years later there were still parts of it he could not say in a steady voice. But some of it has to be told because the whole rest of the story stands on it. He had checked her at 9, and she was sleeping a little rattly, propped on 2 pillows the way the plan said. At 9:40, he went back in because 17 years of night work had given him an animal clock for wrongness, and the room sounded wrong. It was too quiet. A child with a chest cold makes noise. Callie was making almost none, and what she was making was the worst sound Abel had ever heard, a thin, high seagull sound at the top of each breath, and her lips, in the glow of a unicorn nightlight, were the gray blue of dawn water. He did not remember deciding anything. He remembered his hands doing the action plan while his voice did the 911 call, and he remembered that his voice came out flat and procedural, the voice he used on the radio when a line was down across a road, and some far-off part of him was horrified that he could sound like that while holding his own child. The dispatcher said the ambulance was 6 minutes out. He gave Callie the rescue inhaler with the spacer, for puffs, counted breaths that barely came, and told her about Mr. Green in a calm, ridiculous dream, while her eyes worked at him with an animal question in them that no 5-year-old should ever have to ask a father. The paramedics moved like a pit crew. In the back of the ambulance, there was only room for 1 of him and 2 of them, so Abel rode holding his daughter's bare foot, because it was the only part of her not covered by working hands and tubing, and he kept his thumb on her ankle pulse the whole way like a man holding a wire to know if the line was live. At the children's hospital, they took her through doors he was not allowed past, and a nurse with kind, fast hands put in a family room that was too quiet and had a painting of a lighthouse in it. He learned later that they gave that room to the bad ones. 20 minutes went by that lasted a year. Then a doctor came in still wearing the paper hair cover, and she sat down across from him, which he knew was bad because busy people who sit down are never bringing you small news. Pneumonia, she said. On top of the asthma, his daughter's airways were closing like a fist, and her body was tiring out from the work of breathing, and they had made the decision to intubate. A machine would breathe for Callie now, so that her small, worn-out chest could rest and the medicine could work. The doctor was maybe 40, with exhausted, honest eyes, and she did not soften the next part, and Abel was grateful for that for the rest of his life. "We're doing everything we can," she said, "but you need to understand. She is very sick. She may not survive the night. Is her mother here?" Her mother was not here. Her mother was 1,400 miles away, at a resort with 3 pools, with a drink that had fruit on the rim. The hospital called Brielle's phone from the family contact line at the nurse's station, which Abel would learn later mattered enormously because that line was recorded. Standard protocol. Next of kin, critical status. Abel stood 4 feet away while a charge nurse named Faye made the call, and so he heard everything, first live in the hallway, and then, months later, played twice through courtroom speakers. It was not his wife who answered her phone. It was Sondra. Nurse Faye identified herself. The hospital, the pediatric intensive care unit. She said the words respiratory failure, and she said the word critical, and she said the family should come now. And Abel's mother-in-law, poolside on a recorded hospital line, sighed. He heard the sigh. It was the sigh of a woman being asked to move her beach chair out of the sun. And she said, in the bright, bored, brass voice she used on waiters and valets, "Don't ruin the vacation over this. He's just trying to make my daughter come home. He does this. The child has a little asthma. She'll be fine." Nurse Faye's back straightened. She said, "Ma'am, I want to be very clear. The attending physician has said the child may not survive the night." Those words in that order. And Sondra said, "Then he can call us in the morning with an update." And the line clicked. And the recording, months later, ended with 4 seconds of hallway hum. In the courtroom, those 4 seconds were the loudest thing anyone had ever heard. Faye stood there looking at the phone in her hand the way you look at something that has just bitten you. 20 years on a pediatric floor. She had seen everything, and her face said she had just seen something new. She looked at Abel, and whatever was in his face made hers go gentle and furious at the same time, and she said, "Mr. Rourke, I'm going to chart that call. Word for word. That is not a favor to you. That is my job, but I want you to know I'm doing it thoroughly. Remember Nurse Faye. Everything comes back to the people who write things down." Abel texted his wife himself, standing in that hallway. No anger, no editing, just the facts, in plain words, the way he would call on a downline. Callie stopped breathing. Intubated. Pico. Critical. The doctor says she may not survive the night. Come home now. The reply came 40 minutes later, while he was watching a machine lift his daughter's chest and let it fall. "Mama says you always do this. Flights are crazy to change RN. She's in good hands with you. Keep me posted." There was a heart emoji in it. Pink. He stared at that heart emoji for a long moment, in the blue machine light of the room where his daughter lay with a tube down her throat, and something in Abel Rourke that had been flickering for 6 years went out entirely, all at once, and something else came on in its place. It did not feel like rage. Rage is hot and stupid, and he had no use for it. It felt like the moment on a storm site when the assessment is finally done, when you stop hoping the old line can be saved and you call it out loud for the whole crew to hear. Deadline. Cut it clear. We rebuild from the pole. He put the phone in his pocket, and he pulled the vinyl chair to the exact spot where his daughter would see him first if she opened her eyes, and he sat down, and he began the longest night of his life. He held her foot through the blanket, because her hands were full of lines and tape, and a foot was what the ambulance had taught him. Around 3 in the morning, the numbers on the monitor sagged, and people came quickly and did quick things, and the numbers climbed back, and a young respiratory therapist patted his shoulder on her way out without a word. Somewhere in that night, staring at the wall, Abel did the arithmetic that would shape everything after. His daughter might die before sunrise. Her mother knew, in plain English, and had chosen the swim-up bar. Her grandmother knew first, and had not only chosen for herself, but had reached back down the line and unplugged her own daughter's conscience, the way she had been unplugging it for 30 years. There was no version of going back. There was no counseling session, no apology, no anniversary dinner on the far side of this night. Some failures you repair, some you replace. He did not cry that night. He wants that told honestly, not because it makes him sound strong, but because it is what the cold does. He cried 11 days later, alone in his truck in a grocery store parking lot, over a display of strawberries, because strawberries were her favorite, and for 5 days he had not been sure she would ever eat another one. That is how it works. The bill always comes, just never at the counter. But that night he did not cry. That night he watched the machine breathe for his little girl, 20 times a minute, tireless, faithful, and he thought, with a clarity that frightened him a little, I am the only grid this child has. And from tonight, I run it alone. Callie survived the night. And the next one, though the second night went to the wire in a way the first had not, with an alarm at 2 in the morning and 11 people arriving at a run and Abel pressed into the corner of the room, out of the way, praying wordlessly to a God he had not spoken with since his father's funeral, making the kind of tradesmen making corners like that. Take the house. Take the pension. Take my hands. I will learn to work without them. Leave the girl. The girl stayed. 5 days she was in that unit. In the shape of those 5 days, who came and who did not, became the skeleton of everything that happened after. So it has to be told plainly. Here is who came. Abel's mother, Ruth, who got the call at midnight and was in her car by 12:15, who drove 6 hours through the dark from the mountains with a grocery bag of Callie's favorite books on the passenger seat, because stopping to pack anything else had not occurred to her. She walked into the PICU at dawn looking like the ghost of a schoolteacher, which she was read the whole situation in one pass of the room, kissed her son's head like he was 9, and took the second chair. She stayed 5 days. She read Callie books through the sedation because the nurses said hearing helps, and she read with full character voices to an intubated child, chapter after chapter, and dared anyone to find it foolish. Abel's crew foreman came, a slab of a man named Otis who had run line crews for 30 years and had the emotional vocabulary of a torque wrench. He put Abel on emergency leave with one phone call, and then he showed up anyway, twice with gas station coffee, and sat for an hour each time not saying anything, which is how linemen love people. On the second visit, he left an envelope on the chair. The crew had passed a hard hat around, $1,100 in wrinkled 20s. For parking and garbage food, the note said, nobody eats out of that vending machine alone. Spelled wrong, 3 ways. Abel kept the note. Nurse Faye came, every shift she had, and some she did not have. She was the one who taught Abel that you talk to sedated children like they are rude house guests who will wake up eventually. And so he did, telling Callie the full unabridged saga of Mr. Green versus the garden hose. And the day they took the tube out, the first thing his daughter said, in a voice like a rusty gate, was Daddy. And the second thing she said was, is Mr. Green okay? And Abel said Mr. Green was thriving. And then he had to go stand by the window for a minute, and Nurse Faye pretended very loudly to need something from the supply cart. Here is who did not come. Her mother, her grandmother. Not the first night, when a doctor said she might not see morning. Not day 2, the bad night. Not day 3, when she opened her eyes. Not day 4, when the tube came out and she croaked her father's name. Not day 5, when Abel carried her out the sliding doors into the sun, all 38 pounds of her asleep on his shoulder, and a valet he had never met before ran ahead of him to get the truck, because some kindnesses do not need to know you. What came instead were photographs. Brielle's public feed, updating on schedule, cheerful as a brochure. The resort pool at golden hour. A catamaran, teal water, toes in the frame. A sunset dinner, 2 glasses touching. Sondra in a white dress, arm raised, mid-toast, captioned living our best life. Each post carried the platform's own timestamp, small and gray, and it turned out indestructible. And Abel, in the vinyl chair, holding a small hand bruised by 4 tape, screenshotted every single one. He could not have told you, on day 2, exactly why. It was the same reflex that made him photograph a failed splice before touching it. Some part of him, the part that documents before it repairs, was already building the file. Later, people would call it cold. Abel thought about the pink heart emoji and declined to argue. On day 3, something happened that Abel had not planned and did not request, and he wants that part told exactly, because Brielle's lawyers would later suggest he had schemed it, and the record says otherwise. The hospital social worker sat down with him, a calm, careful woman who had clearly done this exact sit-down many times, and explained the situation as the hospital saw it. His daughter was critically ill. Medical decisions might need to be made quickly, at any hour. One parent was present and reachable. The other parent was, her words, unreachable by apparent choice during a life-threatening emergency. And the hospital had documentation of that. And in such situations, there was a legal mechanism to make sure the present parent could act alone without delay, because delay, in a PICU, is measured in minutes and sometimes in futures. The hospital's counsel made a call. Abel's hastily retained lawyer, whom we will get to, made another. And on the afternoon of day 3, a family court judge Abel had never met reviewed an emergency motion with the hospital's records attached, including the charted phone call, and signed a temporary order granting Abel's sole emergency custody and full medical decision-making authority. While his wife was on a catamaran, a judge she had never met read what her mother had said on a recorded line and quietly, provisionally, lawfully moved their daughter into Abel's sole care. He read that order 3 times sitting in the vinyl chair. It was 2 pages. It weighed nothing. It was the heaviest thing he had ever held that was not his daughter. They flew home on schedule. That detail deserves its own line, because in 5 years of telling this story, it is the one that makes strangers put their hands over their mouths. Not a day early, not an hour early. They completed the vacation, all 9 days, spa appointments and all, and flew home tanned and rested on the afternoon of day 5. The same day, Abel carried Callie out of the hospital. And at the arrival's gate, they found the first thing they never expected, which was nothing. No Abel at the curb, hat in hand, the way 8 years had trained them to expect. No ride. He had, with 2 texts, canceled the pickup Brielle had assumed and declined to explain. Their messages went undelivered against a phone he had finally silenced. Sondra's checked luggage, 3 bags for 9 days, sat on the curb in the Carolina humidity while the 2 of them called a taxi and paid for it themselves, and Abel would learn from a neighbor that this, the taxi fare, was the first sentence out of Sondra's mouth on American soil. Do you know what that ride cost from the airport at that hour? Her granddaughter had been off a ventilator for 30 hours. What they found at the house was the second thing. The house was empty, not stripped. Abel was not dramatic with furniture, but empty of what mattered. Callie and Abel were at his mother's, on the pediatrician's plain advice that a recovering airway wants a calm house, and on Abel's own private amendment that the calm was now permanent. Callie's room had been packed with a care that took him half a day, the books in their reading order, the lizard drawings peeled gently off the wall, the unicorn nightlight wrapped in a towel like it was crystal. And on the kitchen counter, squared up neat at right angles, the way he left tools, sat a single folder. Inside the folder, in order, a copy of the temporary emergency custody order, signed on day 3 while they had been at the swim-up bar. A copy of the divorce petition, filed that morning, 9:15 a.m., before their flight had crossed the coastline. A certified printout of the hospital visitor log, 5 days of it, every name that had passed the picket desk. Ruth Rourke for separate days. Otis Grandy twice. A rotation of aunts and neighbors and one bewildered, beloved preschool teacher. And at the bottom were the form provided lines for parent and guardian visits. The printed names Brielle Rourke and Sondra Pell, each followed by the hospital's clean, official, unarguable 0. And one sticky note, in Abel's blunt pencil hand, the only editorial he permitted himself in the entire folder. She survived. No thanks to you. My lawyer's card is attached. Brielle called him 19 times that night. He did not answer, on advice of counsel and on advice of his own spine. 18 of those voicemails were deleted by the lawyer's office after transcription. The 19th was preserved, flagged, and eventually marked as an exhibit, because in 4 minutes of recorded fury, it did not contain one question, not one, about Callie's lungs, her oxygen, her heart, her fear, her whereabouts, or her well-being. It opened with the words, "How dare you embarrass me?" And it closed with a voice in the background, unmistakable, coaching the next sentence. Even her rage had a stage mother. There was one confrontation before the lawyers took over everything. It happened on Ruth Rourke's front porch, 2 days after the folder, and Abel was not even home for it. Brielle drove the 6 hours to the mountains, with Sondra in the passenger seat. To collect her daughter was how she put it through the screen door. Ruth Rourke, 66 years old, retired schoolteacher, 5 feet 3 inches of absolute granite, did not open the screen. She stood behind it with a dish towel over her shoulder and listened to the whole aria, the tears, the rights, the "how dare you all." And when it wound down, she said, in a voice that had run classrooms for 40 years, the following, which a neighbor across the road heard clearly and repeated at the hearing. "There's a little girl asleep upstairs who spent 5 days on machines, and her fever chart is on my refrigerator, and I read to her through a tube in her throat." "Where is your chart, Brielle? What did you read to her?" "You show me one boarding pass, one dated before her tube came out, and I will open this door." Nobody produced a boarding pass. Sondra started to say something from the bottom step about family and lawyers, and Ruth looked at her, just looked, the way she had looked at 4 decades of children caught lying about homework, and whatever Sondra saw in that face, it put her back in the car. They drove 6 hours home. The screen door never opened. Abel heard about it that night and drove up on the weekend, and his mother waved it off and would not be thanked and only said one thing about it at the sink, not turning around. "Your father never liked that woman at the rehearsal dinner," she said. "He gave me a look when she made that little joke about lineman. I have been waiting 8 years to give it back." The lawyer whose card was in the folder was named Odette Kerr, and she deserves her description. She was a compact woman in her 50s who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the settled, unhurried manner of a person who has already seen your whole case play out and is simply waiting for you to catch up. She had spent 25 years in family law, and she listened to Abel's story from beginning to end without touching her pen, which he learned was her highest form of attention. When he finished, she said, "Mr. Rourke, I'm going to tell you the 2 most important things you will hear this year. The first is that you're not going to say one word about any of this in public. Not to the neighbors, not to the church ladies, not to your crew, not online. Nothing. Because the second thing is this. People like your wife and her mother run on performance. Take away the audience's information, and they will invent their own story, bigger and louder and more foolish, and they will build our case for us while we sit quietly and staple things." She was right within 2 weeks, almost to the day, because the town began to hum, and the story humming through it was not Abel's. At the church Sondra attended on the Sundays, it was socially profitable. At the salon, in the school pickup line, the account spreading was this. Abel Rourke had used a sick child to punish his wife for taking 1 vacation in years. Abel had hidden how serious it was until it was too late to change flights, then sprung it on them as a trap. Abel was controlling, always had been. Ask anyone, and poor Brielle, poor devoted Brielle, had come home from a trip her mother needed for her health to find her child hidden from her and papers on the counter like something out of a horror film. Sondra ran the campaign. Brielle performed it. She cried in living rooms all over New Hanover County that month, and Abel heard about all of it and said nothing, staple by staple, exactly as instructed. And then the filings came, and the whole plan stood up in the light where anyone could see its shape. Brielle's attorney answered the divorce petition with a counterclaim that demanded, in numbered paragraphs, the following. Primary physical custody of Callie. Child support, calculated against Abel's storm pay. Spousal support, an exclusive possession of the house. Read that list twice, Odette said, sliding it across the desk. Because I want you to understand what it is. It is not a legal strategy. It is an appetite. On paper, the counterclaim story was smooth. Brielle was a devoted, stay-at-home mother, the child's primary attachment. Abel was an absentee utility worker who disappeared into storm zones for weeks at a time, kept irregular hours, and could not provide stable day-to-day care. His conduct after the child's illness, isolating her from her loving mother, changing residences abruptly, demonstrated exactly the controlling instability the mother had long endured. The vacation was mentioned once, in passing, as a brief family trip during which the child's condition was misrepresented to the mother. It was clever. It was Sondra's cleverness, top to bottom. Abel's schedule was real. A judge who heard only that story could believe it, and family courts had believed smoother lies than this one. They're going to regret writing it down, Odette said. You do not argue with people like this, Mr. Rourke. You document. And fortunately for us, she said, tapping the folder he had brought her, the screenshots and the sticky notes and the charted call. Fortunately for us, they have spent 9 days documenting themselves. So while Brielle cried on porches, the quiet case grew, staple by staple, in a brown accordion file in Odette's office. The recorded family contact call, subpoenaed intact from the hospital system, Sondra's voice bright as brass. The words may not survive the night, audible twice before the click. The certified visitor log with its 2 zeros. Nurse Faye's charted note from the night itself. Written on her own initiative, timestamped 10:19 p.m., and her witness statement, offered before she was even asked. 6 years of card statements, highlighted, totaled $61,000 flowing downhill to Sondra. Callie's preschool and pediatric records, 5 years of them, showing in dull administrative ink who did every drop-off, every pickup, every well visit, every sick visit, every emergency. Abel Rourke. On storm weeks, Ruth Rourke. In 5 years of paperwork, in any capacity, on any line, the mother and the grandmother appear to combine 4 times. And the 2-column exhibit. Odette built it herself, and Abel watched her do it. And it remains the coldest document he has ever seen assembled. Left column, Callie's medical chart, hour by hour, in the hospital's own language. Right column, the vacation feed, post by post, with the platform's own timestamps. She ran them side by side down the page and let the clock do all the talking. 9:52 p.m., patient intubated. 10:14 p.m., photograph, cocktails, caption, girls' night, palm tree emoji. 2:11 a.m., rapid response, called to bedside. 9:40 a.m., photograph, breakfast buffet, caption, no bad days. For 30 p.m., patient extubated, first words recorded by nursing staff. For 55 p.m., photograph, spa robes, caption, self-care isn't selfish. When the custody evaluation came, the court's appointed evaluator interviewed everyone. Abel twice. Ruth, the preschool teacher. Both women, who performed devotion so hard the evaluator's report used the word rehearsed in writing. And, carefully, with a child specialist in a room with beanbags and one-way glass, Callie herself. Nobody coached her. Abel was fierce about that, and it would not have mattered anyway, because 5-year-olds cannot be coached, only contaminated, and she was clean. Asked gently about the hospital, about who was there, Callie thought about it with the enormous seriousness she brought to lizard naming, and said 5 words that went into the report verbatim, and from the report into the hearing, and from the hearing into the permanent record of the state of North Carolina. Daddy stayed. He always stays. The strawberries deserve their paragraph, because Abel promised honesty. 11 days after Callie came home, he was in the grocery store alone, buying the boring staples of a rebuilt life. And he turned an aisle corner, and there was a display of strawberries, first of the season, in their little green baskets. Callie's favorite food on this earth. And Abel Rourke, who had not broken in the ambulance, or in the lighthouse room, or on the bad second night, or on any porch or in any office since, stood in front of the strawberries and came apart completely, silently, holding the cart, because for 5 days he had genuinely not known whether his daughter would ever eat another one. A stock boy asked if he was all right. He said allergies. The stock boy, 19 and wiser than his job required, said, "Take your time, sir," and moved the cart gently out of the aisle traffic and left him alone. Abel bought 4 baskets. Callie ate them in 2 days and named nothing after anyone, and never knew. That is where the bill came due. Never at the counter. Always in some aisle, later, when the body finally decides it is safe to feel what it carried. The hearing came in October, in a family courtroom with bad fluorescent light and wooden benches worn smooth by 40 years of the county's worst days. No jury. Family court is a bench trial, 1 judge, and the judge was the Honorable Regina Okafor, 22 years on the family bench, a woman with reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair and a face that had long ago stopped giving anything away for free. Abel wore his one good suit and sat still. Stillness he could do. He had waited out ice storms in a bucket 40 feet up. He could wait out this. He was not alone on his bench. Ruth sat on his left in her Sunday coat. And on his right, taking up a bench and a half, sat 4 linemen in press shirts that fit them like apologies, Otis in the middle with his arms crossed, all of them on shift swaps nobody had asked them to arrange. They said nothing all day. They were not there to say anything. They were there so that when the judge looked out at the room, she would see, behind the quiet man in the one good suit, the people who show up. Odette said later that judges notice benches. Judges, she said, have spent their whole careers reading who sits behind whom, and nobody testifies louder than 4 working men using vacation days in silence. Brielle testified first, and she was good. He had 8 years of knowing exactly how good, and she was at her best. Soft gray cardigan, hair plain, a tissue tucked in the sleeve like a grandmother, which was its own small performance, borrowed costume from a better woman. Her attorney walked her through the story in gentle questions, and she gave the courtroom a devoted mother trapped in a marriage to a controlling, absent man. The vacation had been her one escape in years, prescribed, practically, for her health. And then the trembling chin, the pause, the tissue. He never told us how serious it was. Her voice broke in exactly the right place. If I had known my baby might die, I would have swum home. In the gallery, Sondra dabbed her eyes on cue. They had always been a duet. Abel watched Judge Okafor watch the performance, and the judge's face moved not at all, and he thought, she has seen this act before. Every week for 22 years, probably. The cardigan, the tissue, the swum home. The judges have seen everything. That is what the performers never understand. Then Sondra took the stand. She did not have to. Odette said afterward that a smarter lawyer would have kept her 100 miles from that witness box, and that Brielle's lawyer had surely tried, and that there are clients who cannot be kept from a stage at gunpoint. Sondra had spent 30 years as the lead in every room she entered. She was not going to sit in the gallery for the biggest show of her life. She testified with her chin high, in pearls, and she performed grief and grandmotherly devotion with the polish of long practice. And then Odette rose for cross-examination, unhurried as always, reading glasses down on their chain, and asked her one gentle, open door of a question. Mrs. Pell, what were you told on the telephone on the night of March 14th? And Sondra, chin higher, said the sentence she had been rehearsing on porches for 6 months. That we were told the child had a touch of asthma. A cold at most. If anyone had told us it was serious, we would have flown home on the very next plane. He hid from us. That is what that man does. He isolates my daughter. He uses that child as a leash. Frankly, we are the victims here, and I have waited a long time to say so under oath. Under oath. She actually said under oath, and lifted her chin another degree. And in the corner of his eye, Abel saw Brielle's attorney go very still, the stillness of a man listening to ice crack under his own feet. Odette nodded, respectful as a hostess, and walked to the table. Your Honor, Petitioner's Exhibit 12. The Pediatric Family Contact Line, March 14th, 10:07 p.m. The hospital's system, as the record's custodian testified this morning, records that line automatically. The courtroom speakers were old and slightly tinny, and it did not matter at all. You could hear the ring. You could hear Nurse Faye identify herself, the hospital, the unit. You could hear her say respiratory failure and critical, and the family should come now. And then, filling that wooden room to the corners, a voice everyone present had just spent 20 minutes listening to under oath, bright and bored and unmistakable. Don't ruin the vacation over this. He's just trying to make my daughter come home. He does this. The child has a little asthma. She'll be fine. Ma'am, I want to be very clear. The attending physician has said the child may not survive the night. Then he can call us in the morning with an update. Click. For seconds of hallway hum. Silence. Abel had thought he would feel something enormous when it played. He had braced for it for weeks. What he felt instead was the flat, precise calm of a splice test coming back exactly as predicted. And what he watched was the room. The clerk had stopped moving. Brielle's attorney was looking at a legal pad, as if it might open and take him in. Brielle had gone the color of the courtroom wall, and Sondra, in the witness box, in her pearls, had for the first time in Abel's 8 years of knowing her absolutely nothing to say. Judge Okafor took off her reading glasses, folded them, and said, "Play it again, please." The second time through, the judge did not watch the speakers. She watched the witness. And when the click came, and the hum, and the silence, she said, in a voice with no weather in it at all, "Mrs. Pell, you may step down. Do not leave the building." The rest of the day was, Odette said later, the legal equivalent of restoring power to a neighborhood. Methodical, unglamorous, poll by poll. The 2-column exhibit went up on the easel, chart beside feed, hour beside hour, intubation beside cocktails, rapid response beside breakfast buffet, extubation, first word daddy beside spa robes, and self-care isn't selfish. Brielle's attorney objected to relevance because he had to say something, and Judge Okafor overruled him with a sentence Abel later heard repeated in the courthouse coffee shop. "Counsel, this is the most relevant thing anyone has shown me all week." The money went up, $61,000, highlighted total, dated. The school records went up, 5 years of drop-offs and pickups and sick calls, a bureaucratic portrait of who actually raises a child, and the combined 4 appearances in 5 years by the 2 most devoted women in New Hanover County. Nurse Faye testified in scrubs straight off shift because the subpoena had said, "We will work around your schedule," and she had said, "No, you will not. That child waited 5 days. The court can hear me today." She described the night of March 14th in the flat. Precise language nurses keep for the worst things. And she described day 3, when a 5-year-old with a tube fresh out of her throat asked, in a rusty whisper, when her mama was coming, and what she, Faye, a 20-year veteran of that floor, had had to stand there and invent by way of an answer. The court reporter, a professional statue, stopped typing for 1 full second. Abel watched her hands. The victim's story did not die dramatically. That is not how it goes, and anyone who tells these stories otherwise has never sat in one of those rooms. It died the way a downline dies when the crew finally cuts the source. It just stopped humming, and everyone in the room could suddenly see that it had only ever been wire. The rulings came down 3 weeks later, in a written order that Odette read to Abel over the phone while he sat in his truck outside a substation with the engine off. He kept the list. He will keep it forever. Custody. Sole legal and primary physical custody of the minor child to the father. The mother received supervised visitation, 2 hours, twice monthly, at the County Family Center, expandable only upon completion of a court-approved parenting course and a demonstrated pattern of attendance. The order's language was surgical, and 1 sentence of it got quoted in the courthouse for years. The court finds the mother demonstrated a sustained and voluntary indifference to the child's welfare during a life-threatening medical crisis, and find her testimony regarding her knowledge of that crisis not credible. Not credible. In the trade of family court, Odette explained, those 2 words are a dropped anvil. They mean the judge is calling you a liar in language the appeals court will respect. Child support. Brielle had demanded it from Abel in her counterclaim, in a numbered paragraph, with a worksheet attached. Judge Okafor ran the same statute in the other direction. Custody to the father meant the mother owed support, calculated on the income she had sworn, under oath in her own filing, that she was capable of earning once free of the marriage. Her own exaggeration, made to look independent and wronged, became the number she now owed monthly. The thing she filed for became the bill she pays. Odette said she had seen that particular reversal land cleanly maybe twice in 25 years, and never that hard. The money. The court reviewed 6 years of statements and made a finding of dissipation of marital assets, the trips, the boutiques, the loans that were never loans, and adjusted the division of the estate dollar for dollar until Abel's half was made whole. Brielle had counted on the house. She received her equity minus the dissipation, which came, after the math, to almost exactly nothing. The house, the actual walls, and the yard with the fence post where Mr. Green held office hours, went to Abel, who had the record showed, paid for every board of it. Spousal support. Denied, in 1 paragraph, with a citation to the dissipation finding. You cannot spend a man's storm pay on your mother for 6 years and then invoice him for the lifestyle. That is not the sentence the order used. It is the sentence the order meant. And Sondra, the court could not punish her for cruelty. Cruelty to a son-in-law is not a crime, and being a poison in your daughter's ear carries no sentence. More is the pity. But perjury is a crime. Her sworn testimony. If anyone had told us it was serious, we would have flown home, played against Exhibit 12, in which she is told twice in plain words that the child may not survive the night, earned her a formal referral to the district attorney's office. She left that courthouse with a criminal case number attached to her name, and eventually, after her attorney explained what juries do with recordings, a plea, a conviction that will follow her into every background check, a fine that stung, and 400 hours of community service, which the county, with a sense of humor Abel chose to believe was intentional, assigned to the Children's Hospital Auxiliary, folding linens. The civil side reached her too. The dissipated money had been marital property, and the estate had a claim, and the judgment for those never repaid loans attached to the one asset Sondra had, the condo with the paid-for association fees. She sold it under the judgment inside a year. At 63, Sondra Pell moved out of her tanned, toasting, best life condo and into the second bedroom of the small apartment her daughter could now afford, which is to say barely. Sit with that arrangement for a moment, because the whole county did. The architect and the instrument, the coach and the performer broke together in 900 square feet with one car between them and a story neither of them could tell anymore, because everyone within 40 miles has heard the recording quoted, and public hearings are public record. Two women who fed on an audience, locked in a room where the only audience left is each other. The daughter Sondra spent 30 years bending finally sees her mother clearly, every single day, across a small kitchen table, and cannot afford to leave her. Abel did not design that punishment. No court did. It is simply what remains when two people who consume everyone around them finally run out of everyone else. Brielle used her supervised visits at first, then less. The parenting course that would have expanded them came and went unenrolled twice. The last visit she attended, the center's log noted she spent 40 minutes of the 2 hours on her phone. Callie reported it in the truck afterward. Not wounded, just factual, a small meteorologist reading the sky she was born under. Mommy had a text. Abel gripped the wheel and kept his voice level and said, "Thanks for telling me, Bug. Ice cream?" And she said, "Obviously." And that was the whole conversation. And if there is a sadder, smaller tombstone for a marriage than Mommy had a text, Abel has not heard it and hopes he never does. And Callie. Callie is 6 now. Her lungs came all the way back. The pulmonologist recommended swimming, best thing in the world for asthma. So she is on the YMCA swim team, where she is neither the fastest nor the slowest, but is, by unanimous account, the loudest. She renamed the backyard lizards after her swim coaches, which the coaches consider the highest honor of their careers. Mr. Green is still Mr. Green. Some titles are for life. Some nights, she still wants the hall light on and her door open, and the hall light stays on. Every night, no questions, because in Abel's house nobody rations light. He is a lineman. Light is the one thing he will never, ever run out of. He works local now. He gave up the storm-chasing contracts, the big out-of-state money, and took the municipal job, home by 5:30, coaching adjacent at swim meets, present. The promise he made at 22 at his father's graveside, the half he cannot keep before, he keeps now, every single ordinary day, and he has learned that ordinary days are the entire point, that they were always the entire point, that everything else is just weather. Last month, over cereal, out of nowhere, in the tone she uses for administrative matters, Callie asked, "Daddy, do I still have to go to Grandma Sondra's?" "No, sweetheart," Abel said. "Never again." She nodded once, satisfied, filed it wherever 6-year-olds file the closed cases, and moved on to the pressing question of whether lizards have birthdays, and whether Mr. Green's should involve a cake he obviously could not eat. And that was it. That was the whole ending. No speeches, no tears, no music. Just a small girl breathing easy over cereal in a warm kitchen, in a house where every single person who is present stays. They went looking for paradise, and they left a child on a machine to do it. 5 days. And when they came back, everything they had left running on Abel's patience, the money, the marriage, the story, the power, every line of it had been shut off at the source by the quiet man in the bucket truck they never once thought to take seriously. Turning the power off is a lineman's job too. They just never advertised that part.